You walk into a room expecting a debate that a civil exchange of ideas on one of the most complex, contentious issues of our time. What you get instead is a masterclass in evasion, a performance so detached from reality, it would be laughable if the stakes weren't so high. This is the story of a moment when a single, prepared United States senator, armed with nothing but facts and a relentless pursuit of the truth, walked into the lion's den of academic buzzwords and ideological posturing and emerged having exposed a fundamental dishonesty at the very heart of the argument. The setting is a Senate committee hearing. The topic, free speech on college campuses, the rise of so-called cancel culture, and the delicate balance between academic freedom and creating an inclusive environment. On one side, senators tasked with oversight. On the other, a panel of esteemed academics, deans, and professors brought in to explain the current landscape. Among them, a particular professor, let's call him Dr. Alastair Vance, a published author, a frequent commentator on equity and inclusion, a man whose very title and pedigree are meant to be the final word on the subject. His opening statement is a symphony of carefully curated language, lived experience, marginalized voices, harmful discourse, power structures. It's a script we've all heard before, delivered with the calm, unassailable authority of someone who believes the moral high ground is his by divine right. That he speaks of the need to contextualize speech, to understand that some ideas aren't just wrong, but are inherently violent. He argues that the university's role is not just to host debate, but to actively curate it, to protect students from rhetoric that could undermine their sense of belonging. The other panelists nod along. It's a united front, a wall of academic consensus. And then, it's Senator John Kennedy's turn. You know Kennedy, the Louisiana Republican with that folksy drawl that disarms people. He doesn't look like a Harvard Law Review editor, which he is. He often plays the bewildered country cousin, asking simple questions that have a way of unraveling the most complex of pretenses. He begins politely, almost deferentially. Thank you for being here, Doctor. I've read some of your work. Very thought-provoking. He lets that hang. Then, he goes to the heart of the testimony. Doctor, you've said here today, and I'm paraphrasing, that the university has a duty to intervene when speech creates a hostile climate. Is that a fair characterization? Dr. Vance agrees, expanding on the point. Kennedy nods, seeming to absorb it. And you've also written, and correct me if I'm wrong, that certain historical analyses, if they challenge a, quote, progressive understanding of oppression, can be themselves a form of intellectual violence. Vance, growing more confident, affirms this. He begins to explain the theoretical framework. Kennedy lets him. He's giving him rope. Then, the pivot. The atmosphere in the room, which was a low hum of procedural boredom, begins to change. You can feel it through the screen. Kennedy's tone shifts, just a fraction. It's no less polite, but the folksiness hardens into something surgical. Doctor, he says, holding up a sheet of paper. I want to talk about applying these principles consistently. You're a public intellectual. You have a platform on social media, specifically on Twitter, now X. Is that correct? Dr. Vance confirms he does. And you use that platform to engage in public discourse, to share your views, correct? Another confirmation. The trap is not yet visible, but it is set. And the entire room is about to witness what happens when someone tries to sell a theory they themselves don't live by. Kennedy leans forward. The folksy charm is now a distant memory. In its place is the prosecutor. Dr. Vance, I have here a series of tweets from your account, at @prof_Vance. I'd like to read a few of them, and I'd like you to help me and this committee understand how they fit within the framework you've just described for us. You can see, even in the poor quality of the C-SPAN feed, a flicker behind Dr. Vance's eyes. A micro-expression of panic, instantly suppressed. He adjusts his tie, gives a slight, tight smile. Of course, Senator. I stand by my public commentary. Kennedy reads the first one, quote, the entire foundation of Western economic thought is a justification for plunder. End quote. He looks up. That's from you, dated June 14th of last year. He doesn't ask a question yet. He lets the words hang in the sterile committee room air. That sentence, in that room, sounds different than it does in a Twitter feed surrounded by blue checkmark affirmations. It sounds sweeping, absolute, and to many in that chamber, profoundly insulting. Vance clears his throat. Senator, that is a critique of classical economic theory from a post-colonial lens. It's an academic argument about the roots of capital accumulation. I see. An academic argument. So, if a student in, say, an Economics 101 class were to stand up and defend Adam Smith, argue that his work wasn't about plunder, but about mutual benefit through trade, under your framework, would that student's speech be creating a hostile climate for, say, a student who agrees with your tweet? Would it need to be contextualized, or perhaps even curtailed? Vance is caught that if he says no, he undermines his entire prior testimony about the harmful impact of certain ideas. If he says yes, he looks like a caricature of a censorious academic. He tries to bridge the gap. It's about the power dynamic in the classroom, Senator. The professor has a responsibility to ensure all viewpoints are heard, but also to frame them within an understanding of historical inequity. Kennedy just blinks, slowly. He doesn't press it. Not yet. He's stacking bricks that he moves to the second tweet. This one is more explosive. Quote, any defense of the Second Amendment is, inherently, a death wish for American children. End quote. He puts the paper down. The room is dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. This isn't an abstract critique of 18th century economists. This is a direct, contemporary, and vicious condemnation of roughly half the country and the elected officials who represent them. Several senators on the panel shift in their seats. A low murmur starts in the public gallery. Dr. Vance, you are a professor of sociology. You teach young, impressionable minds. You testified under oath about the need for universities to prevent speech that could cause harm or foster a climate of fear. Do you believe that tweet, accusing millions of law-abiding Americans who support a constitutional right of harboring a death wish for children, do you believe that tweet fosters a climate of civil discourse? Or does it perhaps, in your own words, dehumanize a group of people based on their political beliefs? The trap is now sprung. The inconsistency is glaring, naked, and undeniable. Vance is flustered. Senator, that was a comment on policy, on the outcomes of policy. It was a rhetorical device to emphasize the stakes. Kennedy cuts him off, not angrily, but with the precision of a scalpel. A rhetorical device that I understand. So, for the record, if a student in one of your sociology classes were to tweet, any defense of gender-affirming care for minors is, inherently, a mutilation wish for American children, would that be a permissible rhetorical device to emphasize stakes? Or would that be reported to your university's bias response team as hate speech? Checkmate. The principle he demanded for others is now being applied to him, and he is utterly unprepared to accept it. The high-minded theory of harmful speech collapses when the harmful speech is his own. He stammers. He talks about nuance, about intent, about the difference between criticizing a power structure and criticizing marginalized groups. But the dichotomy is broken. The audience is no longer listening to his theory. They are watching a man try to justify a glaring double standard. And the room is starting to realize it. The energy is shifting. The wall of consensus has a crack. And Senator Kennedy is about to swing a sledgehammer. You can feel the eruption building. It's a pressure cooker, and Kennedy just turned the heat to high. The genteel pretense of the academic seminar is gone. This is now a collision of worldviews, and the professor's fortress of jargon is crumbling under direct fire. The other panelists look uncomfortable, studying their notes as if they might find an escape route written in the margins. The committee chairman, sensing the historical clip unfolding, lets it ride. He knows everyone in that room, and everyone who will see this later, is now invested in the answer to a fundamental question. Does this man believe his own rules? Kennedy doesn't wait for a coherent answer on the Second Amendment tweet. He knows he won't get one. He moves in for the kill. Doctor, let's move to a third example. This one is longer. A thread you posted in the wake of the last presidential election. Vance's face pales slightly. He knows what's coming. You wrote, and I'll summarize, that the elected officials who contested the election results in certain states were, quote, domestic terrorists engaging in a white supremacist coup attempt. You further stated that anyone who provided material support to these officials, which you defined as voting for them, donating to them, or publicly advocating for them, was, quote, complicit in the destruction of democracy. Kennedy lowers the paper. His voice is flat, cold. By these officials, You were referring to, among others, the sitting senator from my state, and roughly half of the members of this very committee. You are stating, for the public record, that we are terrorists, that our staff are terrorists, that the millions who voted for us are complicit in terrorism. The room is absolutely still. This is no longer about campus speech codes. This is about a tenured professor at a public university labeling sitting United States senators as terrorists. The gravity of it sinks in, heavy and silent. Dr. Vance. Senator, that was a moment of high political tension. The language was perhaps forceful, but it was describing what many scholars have called an insurrectionary. I'm not asking for your political analysis, Doctor. I am asking you to apply your standard, your framework, the one you came here today to advocate that we impose on every college campus in America. If a professor of political science, say, tweeted that Black Lives Matter activists are domestic terrorists engaging in a Marxist coup attempt, and that their supporters were complicit, would that professor keep his job? Or would he be investigated, condemned by the university, and likely fired for creating a terrifyingly hostile climate for every student of color on that campus? Vance is cornered. The hypocrisy is so vast it's a canyon. He tries to retreat into academia. The contexts are historically distinct. The power dynamics are completely different. You cannot equate a movement for racial justice with a movement to overturn a free and fair election. He's getting louder, more emotional. The calm, curated persona is shattered. He's not debating a peer. He's being cross-examined by someone who read his receipts, Doctor. With all due respect, you are not answering the question. I did not ask you to compare movements. I asked you to apply your rule. You have a rule. You came here to sell us that rule. The rule says some speech is so harmful, so violent in its effect, that it must be managed by authority. I am simply asking you, does your speech meet your own definition of harm? It's a yes or no question. He cannot say yes.to do so would be to condemn himself. To admit his own tweets are the very poison he claims to want to purge. He cannot say no. To do so would be to admit his entire philosophical framework is a subjective sham, a weapon to be used against his enemies and a shield to protect himself. He is trapped in the logical prison of his own making. And in that endless, 5-second pause, the entire ideological construct he represents is exposed as hollow. It's not about safety. It's not about harm. It's about power. The power to define what is acceptable and for whom. The power to call your opponents terrorists while demanding protection from their harmful words. And that's when the room begins to erupt. It starts with that one audible gasp, then a stifled laugh from somewhere in the back, then murmuring, like a wave, building. The camera pans to other senators. Some are hiding smiles behind their hands. Others are shaking their heads in open disbelief. The dam of procedural decorum has broken. The audience isn't just observing a hearing anymore. They're witnessing a public unmasking. And Senator Kennedy, seeing his opponent intellectually defeated, does the most devastating thing possible. He shows pity. You don't have to answer that, Doctor. I think you just did. The mercy of this statement is more brutal than any further questioning. By refusing to twist the knife, Kennedy demonstrates he's won. The battle is over. The point is made. The professor's ideology cannot survive contact with the principle of equal application. It's a theory built on a foundation of for thee, but not for me. What happens next is a lesson in political theater and human psychology. The hearing continues, but the center cannot hold. The other panelists, when questioned, are now hyper-cautious, measuring every word, terrified of being subjected to the same forensic dismantling. The energy in the room is electric, but it's focused entirely on the spectacle that just unfolded. In the public gallery, phones are out, people are texting furiously. The clip is being born in real time. But let's pause here and analyze why this moment is so devastating. It's not just a gotcha. It's the systematic exposure of the central flaw in this modern worldview, the refusal to universalize principles. When challenged, the proponent always retreats into special pleading. My speech is different because my cause is just. My anger is righteous, theirs is hateful. My violence is metaphorical, theirs is literal. Kennedy forced that retreat into the open and held it up to the light, and it instantly withered. He demonstrated that the professor was. He demonstrated that the professor was not a truth seeker, but an advocate, not a guardian of dialogue, but a would-be commissar of permissible thought. This is the core of the issue for millions of Americans. They see a ruling class in academia, in media, in corporate boardrooms that has created a new set of secular commandments. But these commandments come with a hidden clause. The priesthood is exempt. You must respect all identities, but we can vilify yours. You must embrace diverse viewpoints, but we will dismiss yours as illegitimate. You must tolerate offensive speech unless it offends us. Kennedy's brilliance was in using the professor's own words to illustrate this hypocrisy in a way that was undeniable and televisual. The reaction in the room confirms this. The applause and murmurs aren't just for Kennedy's performance. They are a release of pent-up frustration. It's the sound of people who have felt talked down to, labeled, and morally lectured by a class of people who seem utterly unaccountable to the rules they demand of others. Watching that class representative squirm, evade, and ultimately fall silent is cathartic. It's a moment of democratic accountability, rare and precious. Mr. Chairman, this is what we're dealing with. This is the intellectual framework being taught to our young people. It's not a framework of freedom. It's not a framework of open inquiry. It's a framework of power. Who has the power to label? Who has the power to silence? Who has the power to define truth? And it is a framework that its most eloquent advocates cannot, or will not, apply to themselves. If the rule isn't good enough for the rule maker, it's not a good rule. With that, he broadens the scope. This isn't about one professor's bad tweets. It's about the integrity of the entire system he represents. It's about the trustworthiness of the experts we are told to defer to. If the architect of a safer speech code cannot live under its provisions, why should any student, any citizen, be subjected to it? The question hangs over the remainder of the hearing like a fog. Every subsequent witness is now implicitly being measured against the Kennedy standard. Do you live by the rules you want to impose on others? The hearing was forever changed in those 10 minutes. And the aftermath was just beginning. The hearing concludes, but the phenomenon is just igniting. As the attendees stream out into the hallway, the buzz is palpable. Reporters scramble, not for the usual boring soundbite, but for reaction to the explosive exchange. The clip, clean, devastating, and perfectly shareable, is already being edited. It has all the elements of viral gold: a clear hero, a clear hypocrite, a clear mic drop moment, and a profound underlying truth about power and fairness. Within an hour, it's everywhere. It dominates political Twitter. It's the lead on conservative news sites and a grudging, often context-heavy feature on mainstream outlets. The headlines tell the story of perception. Kennedy obliterates professor on hypocrisy. Woke professor can't handle his own medicine. A masterclass in cross-examination. The professor's defenders swing into action, but their arguments sound weak in the face of the visual evidence. They don't engage with the central hypocrisy. They attack Kennedy's style, grandstanding, his motives, a stunt, or they try to justify the professor's tweets as understandable given the threat. But none of it sticks. The image is too powerful. The smug expert, rendered speechless by his own contradictions. Meanwhile, Dr. Vance becomes a reluctant, infamous celebrity. His university releases a tepid statement supporting Professor Vance's right to free expression and his esteemed service to the university. It's a non-defense defense. They know they can't defend the content without endorsing the labeling of senators as terrorists, and they can't condemn it without alienating their own activist base. They are stuck in the same trap he was. His email inbox is flooded. His classes are suddenly of interest to provocateurs. He has become a symbol, and not the one he intended. The real impact, however, is cultural. Kennedy's line of questioning provides a simple, replicable template for challenging this entire genre of argument. In living rooms, on social media, in op-eds, people begin applying the Kennedy test. Ask them if their rule applies to them. It becomes a shorthand for exposing double standards. The hearing transcended politics. It entered the toolkit of public debate. It empowered people to say, hold on, let's think this through consistently. For a public weary of being lectured, it was a liberation. This is why the moment resonated so deeply. It wasn't about left versus right in the traditional sense. It was about the governed versus the governing class. It was about the people who make the rules versus the people who have to live under them. Kennedy channeled a deep, populist frustration with elites who seem to live in a different universe with different laws. He gave that frustration a voice, a strategy, and a victory. The professor wasn't just a political opponent. He was an avatar for every unelected bureaucrat, every condescending commentator, every corporate HR department issuing diktats they themselves would never follow. The ripple effect hits Washington. Other senators, seeing the power and popularity of the moment, become bolder in their own oversight. The era of witnesses delivering unchallenged, jargon-filled testimony begins to wane. Preparation becomes key. The lesson is learned. The American people are watching, and they have a low tolerance for being talked down to by hypocrites. The professor's bad day improved the quality of democratic accountability, if only by raising the cost of blatant intellectual dishonesty. But what about Dr. Vance? What becomes of a man whose life's work was publicly unraveled in a committee room? Does he reflect? Does he double down? The aftermath for him is a quieter, more personal story. One of canceled speaking engagements, of whispers in the faculty lounge, of a legacy now permanently tied to a 7-minute YouTube clip. He learned the hard way that in the age of viral accountability, the walls between your private activism and your public testimony are paper thin. And the principle you demand for your campus can, and will, be applied to your life. To truly understand the depth of this confrontation, we need to step back from the political theater and look at the philosophical fault line it revealed. This wasn't a new argument. It's the oldest tension in a free society, the conflict between liberty and security, between the right to speak and the right to be free from the consequences of that speech. The classic liberal tradition, from Mill onward, argues that the remedy for bad speech is more speech, that truth emerges from conflict, and that granting any authority the power to silence harmful ideas is a cure far worse than the disease. The modern framework Dr. Vance represents is a radical departure from that. It draws from critical theory, which views society not as a collection of individuals seeking truth, but as a network of power groups in constant conflict. In this view, speech is never neutral. It's a weapon of the powerful to maintain dominance. Therefore, free speech is a myth that merely perpetuates oppression. The goal is not open debate, but justice, achieved by dismantling oppressive power structures, which includes silencing the language that upholds them. This is why context and power dynamics are everything to them. A slur from a majority group member is an act of power. The same slur against that group is an act of resistance. The content is less important than the power relationship of the speaker. Kennedy's genius was enforcing the critical theory model to confront the liberal model on the liberal model's most sacred ground: consistency and equal application. He treated Vance's tweets not as acts of power, which is how Vance sees his own speech, but as propositions to be judged by a neutral rule. He asked, if this rule is good and true, must it not be good and true for everyone? The critical theorist has no answer to this, because his system is explicitly not based on neutral rules. It's based on achieving a desired outcome, social justice, where the ends justify the means. Kennedy exposed that the means involved a blatant, self-serving double standard. This is the fatal flaw. Once you abandon the neutral principle, you are left with raw political power deciding what is true. Today, your speech is resistance. Tomorrow, when the political winds shift, it may be harm. Vance believed he would always be on the side of the righteous, so he never feared the weapon he helped forge. Kennedy showed him that weapons can be turned. The room erupted because people instinctively understand the danger of a system built not on fair rules, but on who has the power to label. History is littered with the victims of this idea. Every totalitarian regime began by silencing harmful speech in the name of the people, the revolution, the nation, or the race. The first to be silenced are always the obvious villains, then the moderates, then the insufficiently pure allies. The slippery slope is not a fallacy, it's a historical fact. The audience in that room, and the millions watching later, saw a man who wanted to place himself and his ideology in the judge's seat, immune from the laws he judges by. And they reacted with the healthy democratic instinct to reject that concentration of power. The Founding Fathers, wary of faction and the tyranny of the majority and minority, built the First Amendment as a neutral shield. It doesn't pick sides. It just says, Congress shall make no law. It assumes that in the messy, raucous, often offensive marketplace of ideas, the good will eventually win out if the competition is fair. The framework Vance advocates is a rejection of that faith. It says the marketplace is rigged, so we must rig it back for our side. Kennedy's victory was a reassertion, however small, of the original, radical, and equitable American idea that the rule of law, not the rule of men or professors, is our only safe foundation. Weeks later, the clip lives on. It's been viewed tens of millions of times. It's been translated, parroted, remixed. It has entered the permanent archive of internet political culture. But its true legacy isn't in views or likes. It's in the shift it represents. The Kennedy moment became a benchmark. It demonstrated that the most sophisticated rhetorical armor could be pierced by the simplest weapon, the demand for intellectual honesty. Dr. Vance retreated from public life. His tweets are locked. His media requests have dried up, or he's declined them. He still teaches, but one can imagine the atmosphere in his classroom has changed. The students now look at him not just as a purveyor of theory, but as a man who failed the most public test of his own theory. His credibility, his moral authority, his most vital currencies were permanently devalued. He is a living cautionary tale about the perils of building a glass house and then throwing stones from a Senate hearing room. For Senator Kennedy, it was a career-defining highlight. It cemented his reputation not as a bomb thrower, but as a surgical truth-teller. It proved that substance, preparation, and a commitment to first principles could cut through the noise. He didn't yell. He didn't name-call. He just followed the logic to its embarrassing conclusion. In an age of outrage, his calm, relentless reason was the most devastating force of all. The debate, of course, did not end. The underlying ideological conflict continues on campuses, in boardrooms, in culture. But the terms of engagement shifted. Proponents of restrictive speech codes now know they must at least attempt to answer the consistency question. They can no longer assume their moral posture will insulate them from cross-examination. The burden of proof shifted slightly. That is a meaningful change. The most hopeful outcome is the potential effect on the next generation. For every student who saw that clip and cheered the exposure of hypocrisy, a seed was planted. The seed of skepticism toward unchecked authority. The seed of the idea that true justice requires consistent rules. The seed of courage to ask the simple, powerful question, does that apply to you? If that moment inspired even a few future leaders, thinkers, or just engaged citizens to value intellectual consistency over tribal loyalty, then its impact will be generational. In the end, the story of the room that erupted is a story about the enduring power of an idea, equality under the law. Not equality of outcome, but equality of principle. It's the idea that the powerful and the powerless, the professor and the student, the senator and the citizen, should be held to the same standard. When Senator Kennedy caught the woke professor lying, not about a fact, but about his commitment to his own stated principles, he was upholding that ancient, revolutionary idea. The eruption in the room was the sound of people recognizing that idea, perhaps forgotten or buried under layers of jargon, suddenly alive and fighting back. It was the sound of a democratic immune system reacting to a pathogen of hypocrisy. And it was a reminder that no matter how complex the theories become, the people still have a sharp eye for a double standard and a voice that will roar when they see one.